start with the presentation session, and Madam Chairperson will join us as soon as she can. The way the session is structured is that we have a set of technical presentations, and that will be followed by a moderated discussion session with sector experts. We will begin by presentation from Dr. Maurizio Busulo, who is the lead economist and chief economist, Office for South Asia, the World Bank, who will be presenting on reshaping social norms about gender, a new way forward. May I request Dr. Busulo to please present? Thank you.
Can you hear us,
Dr. Busulo?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, although I think the sound is a little muted.
Yes, it is.
This is better. It's better.
This is better. Okay, so yes. I just speak up. Then I just said good afternoon for those of you who are there. It's very early morning for me in Washington D.C., but I'm glad to be here and present in this important session, in this important conference. I have no idea if you see my presentation or not. I don't see it on the screen, so it's gonna be difficult.
If you could share your, we cannot see your presentation, Dr. Busulo. Do you have the screen sharing option?
Oh,
if you
okay,
have
I can indeed share my screen then. Okay. Let's see.
We can see it now, Dr. Busulo.
Excellent. Okay, so you can see it and hear me fine. Very good.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for the patience. Even after a few years of virtual conferencing, it's still always a moment of panic when you have to start this, but great. So let me go into this without any other introduction. This is work that we have done and we are still continuing to do in the Chief Economist Office of South Asia at the World Bank. This was work that was produced for the South Asia Economic Focus, which came out in the spring of this year, after the spring meetings. But we're still working on this topic, and we have an active research program on this. Let me start from some main takeaways from this work in the spring. These are as follows. First of all, in South Asia, a key gender outcome that we focus our attention is female labor force participation. This has been said in the introduction, is quite low and has been actually, in terms of trends, even gone down in some countries of the region. And what is really remarkable is that it is lower than what you would expect countries to have at that level of development. The second point is that many other outcomes that are related to the first one in some forms, either as a consequence or as a driver, have also been not showing considerable progress. I'm thinking of marriage age, freedom of movement, asset ownership, among others. They still have very large gender gaps in the region. What we show is behind some of these, and specifically the gap vis-a-vis other countries at the same level of development in terms of female labor force participation can be these deeply rooted social norm about gender. And specifically, we will focus on household division of labor inside the families. And I conclude, we'll discuss briefly the policy recommendation implications. Norms blind policy intervention, even when they are targeted to improve the situation of women, they sometimes have unintended negative consequences. And but there are some evidence. There is some evidence that policy that address norms directly, being these in the short run via information intervention or with long run educational policies, have the capacity to shift social norms and produce positive impacts. So these are the main takeaways. Let me go through some more details on this. The starting point of the work that has been launched in the spring is a large literature and data review on gender disparity in South Asia. And we find, as I already highlighted, two main things. The first one is that the standard drivers for economic participation, for female labor participation, being these demand on the demand side economic growth, and on the supply side rising education and reducing fertility, do not seem to be doing what you expect them to do. And in fact, we find that the female labor force participation in South Asia is as low, almost as low, and has become almost as low as the lowest region, the region with the lowest female participation, which is Middle Eastern and North Africa. You see in this graph on the right-hand side that the female labor force participation and the male labor force participation, and you will notice also that not only is as low, almost as low as MENA, but also the gap with men is the highest, because the men participation is the highest on the right hand side. And as I said, there are a bunch of other gender gaps in several dimensions. I don't have time to go through it, but in the report we show in detail several other disparities. In particular, let me just mention that disparities in South Asia begin in the womb, where you have a bias towards men sex ratio at birth. So it goes fairly deep. The focusing more on, again, on female labor force participation, the usual relationship between that variable and development is what the literature has been dubbing U-shaped curve. At low level of development, many women don't really choose but have to work. Then this participation goes down, and then at a higher level of development, it goes back up. And this has been observed. There is a debate in the literature, but it's broadly what the data show. Here you have a graph that obviously doesn't seem to fit these points, because the points that you see are only for the region, but in fact there are many more points that are not showing this graph. And indeed, the best fitted line would go through them as a U shape, like as you see. But these graphs show when you eliminate all the points and just leave the points representing South Asia, which I hope you are familiar with these acronym, but they are just Nepal and Bhutan are above most of the others, all of the others, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, and Afghanistan are all below what you would expect from this empirical regularity, this relationship, and some are quite below that. And what we are focusing is trying to understand this gap, what is highlighted there in red, the gap that at that level of development, Pakistan would be expected to have a participation of about 50 or more %, but instead it has a participation of about 20 or so %. So we want to focus on other factors because we have, as I mentioned, we have seen that fertility has come down, the education has improved quite a bit. Growth has been, apart from the COVID impact, for when we look at the long term, has been fairly sustained. So we look at social norm and attitudes. Let me begin by showing you something that is what most people use data on attitudes using the World Value Survey. Here you have 4 different types of attitudes. Men are better political leader. Men have more right to jobs than women. University education is more important for boys. And there are some issues when women earn more than their husbands. And the graph is interesting because it has on the horizontal axis the percentage of people who agree with these statements that I just mentioned. And on the vertical axis is the deviation in these percentages. So it's a dynamic, okay? And as you can see, if points are above the 0, it means that there has been an increase in the percentage of people who agree on the horizontal axis. What is interesting is to note that the top right quadrant, the quadrant where there is more than 50% of the people that agree on these statements, and these percentage has been increased, is mainly populated by South Asian countries. So this shows that this region tend to have fairly conservative attitudes towards women. But what we do is an important step forward when one analyzes social norms, and is that we need to define norms and go beyond what has been used until now, which are these attitudes. Social norms, you have their definition, are informal rules of behavior that dictate what is acceptable and appropriate to do in a situation within a given social context. This is from Cristina Bicchieri from University of Pennsylvania, who has been working on this for quite a while. But importantly is to highlight that social norms are different from personal attitude that I showed you before, because they also have an actual social dimension. It's not only what you believe it's important to do, but it's also what you expect others want and think is appropriate to do. Okay, so it includes the perception of others. So, as I said, there are 2 elements. There is the personal belief that I showed, but there is also this social expectation. And when you actually are able to measure both, which is what we did for this work and are continuing to do. We are actually in the field in as we speak in several countries in South Asia to do even better measurement. What you do, you find out an interesting fact that social expectation tend to be normally more conservative than personal belief. In fact, this gap in the literature is called pluralistic ignorance. Look at this graph on the right-hand side. You see that social expectation, that the red dot, in terms of whether the man have more responsibility than the woman in terms of bringing bringing money and covering financial expenses in the household. You see that in any region, everybody believes to live in a more conservative society than their own belief. In particular, in South Asia, 47% of the people believe personally that yes, the man has more responsibility. But when asked, what do you think others think, then this percentage goes to 65. So 65% believe that society in general expect men to be more responsible. So this is an important difference from the attitude. So when we use that, and I'm almost, I'll give you one last graph of findings, and then quickly give you some views on policy. But when we actually use this data, not attitude, we to explain or to account for the gap that I showed you earlier. So in this rather complicated graph, you have on the vertical axis what we wanna try to explain, which is this residual gap, the gap that remains once you have already explained the level of female labor force situation accounted for by the level of development. So you have this gap. How do you explain this gap? Well, if you correlate it with these norms, the male breadwinner norms measured on the horizontal axis, you find three important things. First of all, the more conservative the beliefs, and here, by the way, in the graph you have both the personal belief and the social expectation. But the more conservative are the beliefs or the social expectation, the larger is the negative gap. As you can see, there are negative correlation in the dots, shown also by the lines. The second finding is that the social expectation, as I showed you, they are more conservative, but they also are tighter in terms of the correlation, and it's more negative. So they explain even more than the personal belief. And last point, apart from Nepal and Bhutan, which you showed that they didn't have this bad gap, most of the other countries tend to be towards the bottom right corner, where the conservative norms are at the most conservative and the gaps are larger. So this is quite a powerful finding. Let me finish with a couple of slides on policy lesson. There are some negative lessons that we learn. One of which is that the intervention that have been tried to improve women, when they don't consider norms, they may actually produce some unexpected, unintended consequences. In terms of, for example, literature showed that even when you try to improve legal rights for women, these can sometimes produce a sense of declining bargaining power from the men, and potentially has been measured even an increased gender violence. Or another example in the literature is the fact that even when there has been changes in the rights to inherit and made it equal between men and women, there has been an increase in circumvention of this by more donation before actually the parents pass. So this is the first one, but there are also cases where we can see positive impact. I list here three potential areas. One is when if you remove certain barriers, it shows that indeed things can improve. But more interestingly, there are two sets of intervention that are addressing norms directly. One is, as I said, doing changes in the way that boys and girls think about their identity, and there is evidence, causal evidence that more progressive social norms can be taught in school, and also other intervention in families can shift the views in the longer term. But there are also even faster intervention. There's a very interesting paper done in Saudi Arabia where indeed providing information just about these gap that I showed you, and make people aware that in fact the society they live in is not as conservative as they think, has produced an impact in terms of improvement in the female labor force situation. So I stop there. Thank you for your attention, and I invite you to see the full report. Thank you.
Dr. Basulo, thank you very much for really a very thoughtful, data-packed, thought-provoking presentation, an overarching overview of where data is vis-a-vis South Asia, women's, female labor force participation, and some very important theoretical paradigms on social norms. Ladies and gentlemen, we do have our range of speakers now physically present also. Our honorable chief guest has also joined us. Before I call upon the stage for the chief guest's remarks, may I request the remaining panel speakers to join us on the stage. I call upon Dr. Sonia Umar, Associate Professor, University of Punjab. Ms. Fajr Rabia, CEO, Pakistan Alliance for Girls Education page. Dr. Mariam Mohsin, Assistant Professor, PIDE. Ms. Raja Bukhari, Pakistan Business Council, Karachi. With this, it is my great pleasure and privilege to invite our honorable chief guest, Honorable Chairperson of the National Commission on Status of Women, Ms. Niloufar Bakhtiar, who needs no introduction. Madam Niloufar Bakhtiar, thank you so much for joining us, Madam. An illustrious career of politics, social development, social welfare, currently leading the National Commission on the Status of Women. Madam, we are very privileged to have you. We request you to deliver your opening and keynote address, Madam.
Thank you. Can I go? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to welcome you to this panel discussion. Amara has very kindly introduced me as the chair of the panel, and I'm thankful to SDPI for inviting me for this opportunity. I should also mention the World Bank, because it's a joint collaboration between SDPI and the World Bank. This panel discussion is happening during the 16 days of activism campaign, which for us are very important and significant days. So while we will congratulate SDPI for completing their 25 years and for this Silver Jubilee Conference, we would also like to have our share in this discussion and in this ongoing deliberation. So thank you for including us. I'm grateful to the panelists, the presenters for their presence as well. I would at the outset apologize that I will have to leave immediately after my opening remarks, and I will not be able to sit through the entire panel discussion, unfortunately, because as I just shared with you, I will have to leave for another program because these 16 days of activism campaign are very busy days for the Women Commission and women rights activists as a whole. So I will hope that you would not hold this against me. And I assure the House that I will share these recommendations this evening only and would certainly like to work on the way forward with everyone else. So thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, when we say South Asia, and when we say the social norms and gender inequality, what comes to our mind? For us, the people of South Asia, and especially those who have reached my age, we've seen it all. We know for a fact that this is a disaster-prone area. We know that there is one calamity which is natural, the other disaster which is man-made. There are wars, there are civil wars, upheavals in the political arena, weak economies, lack of healthcare and medical support, poor educational systems, and the poorest of the poor live here. They're housed here. And who is that vulnerable group? The women. So what happens to them? They are always under attack. Whether it is ethnic, cultural, social, religious, the women are always facing challenges. The post-COVID situation, the post-flood situation. I told you already, ladies and gentlemen, that if we have more rains, we have floods. If we have no rains, we have famine. This is how we are, unfortunately. But post-COVID has exposed the social norms across the globe. If you look at the global figures, the UN report says, the UN Women has conducted this survey, 45% women admitted that they faced violence, sexual violence, verbal abuse, or somebody else faced that kind of violence, but that somebody was known to them. 45% claimed that. Then, if you come to another figure, every 7 out of 10 women claimed that they went through harassment and violence by their intimate partners. 6 out of every 10 claimed that they faced violence in public places. This is the state of the world. Now, if we come back to our own little world, what do we expect to happen in Pakistan? What could be the state of women living here, which is already not a very happy situation? I would put it in a coded phrase, because at the same time, I am also struggling with our position at the gender gap index, where Pakistan has been placed at second last. So for the commissions like us who are part of the government and still trying to be autonomous, our positions are also very challenging. But we need the support of institutions like these, where I'm present today. I'll just give you one figure post-COVID from Pakistan. September 20, when the girls and boys came back to schools, there were 13 million missing enrollments. 13 million. And out of those 13 million, 60% were girls. These are very, open figures, but very drastic. And then everything was exposed. Our social fabric was torn apart. The advancement that we had made over decades in the labor workforce was reversed, unfortunately. And not to talk about the unpaid domestic work burden that increased many folds. So today, when we look at the figures in the labor force, the women are at 21% approximately. 68% are men, approximately. But then as you move forward, you see more. You see that the wage difference stands at almost 67%. Now that's huge. Wage difference between men and women. Women are more inclined to work in the informal sector. 74% of the informal economy is all about women. But then what steps are we taking to help those women? Are we giving them opportunities to connect with the markets? Are we trying to get rid of the middleman who blackmails them all the time? Are we helping them with the transportation? No. No major steps are being taken, unfortunately. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the home-based workers, 4.4 million, out of which 3.6 million are women. When I talk about these figures, for me, it's very hurtful, because for me, these are not figures. These are women and girls that I deal with day in and day out, including my daughter and my granddaughter. So it's not easy. And we are not going to roll back. Our advancement should not be challenged. We've come a long way in Pakistan. 3 cheers for the women rights movements. Thank you for the support of our donors. But what we need to say now is very loudly and very strongly that no worry about the political party ruling the country. We should not care about who's in power. The policies should continue. If there is a program like Benazir Income Support Program or a SARS program, which is focusing totally on women, that program should continue. No, that does not happen. The day the government is changed, the focus is totally lost. Please don't let that happen to us. We have laws, a great set of legislations to protect women. Harassment at workplace. We have a national ombudsperson, we have provincial ombudspersons. But do you know what their powers are? The ombudsperson in Balochistan told me one day, she called me and she said, I've been asked by the Secretary Social Welfare Ministry to write a judgment and expedite it. Because all these ombudspersons are working under some ministries. Can you believe this? I am not going to discuss the autonomy of the Women Commission here. I should not be. But the question, ladies and gentlemen, is that are we going to see women at the helm of affairs or not? How long are we going to have these cosmetic changes? I'm very, very happy with the Surgeon General in the Pakistan Army. I'm extremely impressed with the judge in the Supreme Court of Pakistan, who's a female. But the story started with Fatima Jinnah in the 1960s. Remember? She ran for the presidential election, 50s, I think. I don't remember the exact dates now. And then we had Benazir Bhutto, and then the female governor of Sindh, Rana Liaquat Ali Khan, state governor of Pakistan. We've had many achievements. Samina Beg conquered the mountain tops and peaks of Pakistan and in the entire world, as a matter of fact. You see her everywhere. But coming back to those women, which are actually the real Pakistani women, who are resilient, who are brave, and who I see rising from the ashes every time there is a disaster or a calamity. It's the women. I've seen those pregnant and lactating women, mothers in the flood-affected areas. Almost all the provinces of Pakistan were affected, and we were everywhere. There were women who had 10 children, women with 14 children, women with 7, 8 children, young girls, thin and undernourished. So there are many issues. Population planning, I think, is the key. Access to justice, participation in the key decision making. I can go on flagging and naming the issues, but I don't want to take all the time of the other panelists. There are two things I would like to flag before I leave. One, the National Commission on the Status of Women now has a National Gender Data Portal, which we have started with the help of UN Women. But 1 year passed and we could not get any authentic data. Recent data was totally unavailable. So now we are working very closely with the Ministry of Planning and Development. All the P&D departments in the provinces are in league with us. And we are now working for a better face for Pakistan. The true picture, the exact picture, which is from the government of Pakistan, the figures which are real figures. and the Ministry of Planning and Development on the 25th, the day to mark the elimination of gender-based violence, 25th November, when this campaign started, inaugurated along with us a gender cell, which was very, very welcoming. And now our team of National Commission and the Ministry of Planning together are visiting at least 18 universities in Islamabad and Rawalpindi to talk to the students, to the upcoming generation and leaders of Pakistan. So these were two good things that recently happened to us. So I thought I would share with all of you. But I once again thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Amara. And my apologies for leaving right away because I have to be there. And I'm already seeing signals from my staff out there at the gate that I should, stop talking. So good luck for the rest of the panel discussion, and I will wait for the recommendations. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, Chief Guest of today's session, Chairperson, National Commission on the Status of Women, Ms. Niloufar Bakhtiar, who set the tone, the context, and also identified the problems that we are confronted with a very special focus on Pakistan. I want to take this opportunity to highlight something of what we are grappling with really at a structural and societal level. Earlier this year, the National Commission on the Status of Women, under the leadership of Ms. Niloufar Bakhtiar, on behalf of the government of Pakistan, presented the Pakistan report at the Global 66th Commission on the Status of Women under the UN aegis. And UNDP, which is my institution, supported the National Commission on the preparation of that report, the theme of which was the impact of climate change on women. This was, ladies and gentlemen, in March. The report clearly identified the threats and the challenges that climate change poses for women in countries, in climate vulnerable countries like Pakistan. And throughout the spring season of this year, UNDP and the Commission went around the whole country, all the 4 provinces, as well as the special regions of Gilgit-Baltistan and AJK, creating advocacy and having consultations with stakeholders. And then comes summer, and we have the biblical floods in Pakistan, something that this country has never experienced, an unprecedented moment. And it just illustrated what those of us who are monitoring the situation and analyzing the problem have been forewarning. The floods have hit Pakistan. UNDP and World Bank are part of the Development Partners Consortium, which has prepared the post-disaster needs assessment for the government of Pakistan, which the Pakistani government and its development partners are now leveraging for creating a post-floods framework. And one of the worries for all of us is, how is the post-floods recovery and resilience framework addressing the question of women, who are the most vulnerable and the most impacted? So just a pertinent reminder of the country and the regional context in which this very important conversation is happening. Our previous presentation was by Dr. Bosulo, which presented a very, very good data-based overview of South Asia. Our next presentation is by Ms. Shaheen Nasir, who's a researcher at the University of Oxford, and she would talk about gender norms in education in Pakistan. Ms. Shaheen, and may I request all presenters to please strictly limit yourself to the time allotted, 10 minutes. I think it should be an endeavor for all the speakers to leave as much time as possible for discussion. which would be the most valuable part. So over to Ms. Shaheen Nasir.
Thank you so much, Amara. Um, all right, so do you see my screen? Okay, great. So hello, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers for putting this all together. Very happy to present this work in this session. It's a joint work with Sultan and Daniel. Sultan is at New Economic School and Daniel is from Toulouse School of Economics. So just to give you the context, I'm going to actually pick up on where Maurizio has left the interventions to correct social norms. So this is what our paper talks about. What are some of the intervention to correct regressive social norms? And then we provide causal evidence that what works and what doesn't work. So just to give you the motivation of this study, so we see a lot of studies in developing countries in the context of incentives and infrastructure. When we talk about educational outcome, we say if you want to make better teachers, you increase the wages or you improve the mobility of teachers. Our idea here is that teachers can not only serve as the academic role model for the students, but they can also be shifter of regressive social norms. We see a lot of studies that talk about the transmission of social norms from parent to children through active, passive, and generic transmission. I will not go into the detail of these definitions. Maurizio has really made my job much easier by defining so many things which I plan to define. So I would just leave the definitions and happy to talk about that in the discussion session. So the idea that we are presenting here is that one of the mechanism, which is that how we can transmit progressive social norm from to children is rather than parents channel from teachers. The study is in the context of Pakistan, and typically when we talk about gender norms, so we start from the workplaces, we think about university spaces, college spaces. So our idea here is building on already existing research that shows that child brain is malleable. So these are the very impressionable years in a child life when he goes to school, and especially early education, which is primary education. And the idea here is that stereotypes are shaped in early childhood, and actually they reproduce, strengthen, and legitimate inequitable gender system. And how the social interactions unfold in a school, so that has consequences for gender inequity. The role of a teacher in building the social norm or in really correcting the belief of students, so this is not a new idea. Actually, if we go back to the history, so Greek philosophers, famous educationist, Quintilian, he believed that the teacher's obligation was to both foster the good qualities he find in each of the student and correct and change some of their characteristics. He's the guide and molder of the minds of others. So building on these motivation, we asked two research questions. Our first research question is, can progressive attitude be fostered among teachers? And secondly, can these attitudes transmit to students? In order to answer this question, we conducted a randomized controlled trial in Pakistan, and we randomly assigned teachers to different treatment arms. For example, in one treatment arm, teachers were assigned to a training where we showed them visual narrative. I will go into the detail of this in a bit. Followed by, we reinforced visual narrative with the gender studies curriculum. How we have measured the outcome, we looked at the attitudes of these teachers. So these are the self-reported surveys, which basically aims to measure the attitudes of teachers after our training. And then we have used some of the popular methods in academic research that we use to look at the implicit association biases. And we did the same to measure the outcomes for students. So our context is primary school teachers of Pakistan who are teaching very young children. And in all of these classes that were included in our sample, we have mixed gender students. We are talking about primary school. The minimum education of a teacher is 12 years of education. So how the treatment looked like, again, as I said, that we're talking about how to really shift the regressive social norm and to really think about some cost-effective mechanism. And also just to give you a bit of a context that when we are talking about shifting social norms, so in the academic literature, we are talking about non-cognitive abilities, to really train teachers in non-cognitive abilities. So typically when we would have trainings, so we think about training teachers in English, in vocabulary, in mathematics, but we seldom think about really training teachers in soft skills. And actually correcting gender norm is one of the soft skills. In private schools, of course, the story is different, but our context in study is low performing public schools. And there, these topics are rarely talked about. So we basically collaborated with the organization that runs all these schools. So, and we inculcated our training in the regular training program of this organization. So in the treatment arm, so we showed teachers this famous Bowl movie, which many of you would have heard about, and followed by a self-reflection workshop where we talked about the theme of the movie, and then we reinforced this treatment with the self-persuasion treatment, where we gave teachers a gender studies course, which they were asked to teach for 4 months, every week, once in a week, and for 3 hours. What we find here is that treated teachers become more supportive of equitable gender rights. It's just like this, that before COVID-19, we would rarely think about this, that it's important to wash your hands. But once something happened, a shock happened, and then we know that the government wants us to support this attitude. So we are all on the same page. So this is exactly the case here, that the way we basically rolled out our intervention was that this is what your organization wants from you, that you talk about these topics in the class, and you reflect on these topics with your students, and then we saw the impact on the attitude of teachers as well as on students. We, within our randomization data, we re-randomized teacher to either, once we completed our interventions, 6 months, either make same gender study group or mixed gender study group. We gave them different assignment. Every week, students would be participating in these assignments. In some classes, they would make mixed gender, and in some classes, they would make same gender study group. What we find here is that we find large gains in student achievement for mixed gender study group and no impact of our treatment for the same gender study group. And one of the mechanisms that we have experimentally identified here is that effective cooperation between boys and girls appear to drive these results. If I have 5 more minutes, so I would just briefly walk you through the theory of change, like what are some of the things that we talked about in the structure discussion, and what is the theory of a change which actually is playing role or driving our results. So after showing Bowl movie, I will not go into the detail of the movie. That I would just like to explain that after every 15 minutes, we would stop the movie. It was a regular training. All the teachers, the organizers, they were there. And we would ask teachers, what do you learn from this? And what do you think how we can apply these messages in the classrooms? Followed by the movie. So we had this structural discussion where we talked about what Maurizio also mentioned, the Saudi Arabia paper. So where they are talking about the correction of misperceived norms. So if I know that my neighbor is also holding progressive norms, so it has an impact on my perception about social norms. So we talked about, based on literature, we talked about all this existing literature, and we just kind of provided them an environment where they can really talk about these topics very openly without any peer pressure. In the end, we also talked about this, that it's really important that we recognize these stereotypes and make conscious effort to exhibit an equitable persona. And again, this was not really we giving them lecture, it was a structured discussion among teachers, and we were only moderating the discussion. Followed by this treatment we gave to teachers gender studies curriculum. We are calling this self-persuasion. If I'm teaching something, so it is going to have an impact on my own perception, my attitude, my beliefs. As Mauricio just explained, that some of these things could be as simple: women should be allowed to go for work. Women should, if your father is going for work, so your mother can also do the same. It's okay for your father to help your mother in the house chore. So some of these topics were as basic as these. But again, as I said, that we all know it's important to wash your hands. But when we know that COVID happened, and this is really a policy, so it has a different impact. So this is actually the motivation which we are building on in our interventions. So this is
Could
some
I request
brief
you
overview
to
of.
please summarize in the interest of time? Thank you.
Sure. How many minutes I have, Amana? Do I have like 2 minutes or 1 minute?
You have 2 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so this is the equation that we estimated. We looked at the impact of our treatment on different outcome variable. These are the outcome variable, happy to talk about in the end, implicit association test. And we saw the larger gain in the mixed gender study group as compared to the same gender study group. And just last 2 slides. So why does gender study matter? So it's not only about talking about this important, very important topic, but it's also important that the recent research suggests that teaching concept can be an instrument of self-persuasion. So it's really important to mentalize that it's not only updating the belief, it's also that when you reflect, when you read in detail, so these topics are going to stay in a student mind for a long time when his or her teacher is talking about that and they are self-reflecting together. So just to conclude that in our experiment, we find that progressive gender norms can be cultivated, and we find the persistence of our results in the midterm and the long term. And just to summarize, of course, there is much more detail that I would have loved to talk about, but in the interest of time, I would just say that one line which really concludes our study, that gender study curriculum combined with some of these activities in the class, for example, making mixed gender study group may enhance ability to take another person perspective. And these interaction could really improve theory of mind via cooperation and coordination. And this is really important, that if we think about shifting regressive social norm, so one of the results, or one of the finding, I would say, that we understand from our study is that primary school level is really, I would say, an important space to really think about these very important topics. I thank you all for your attention.
Shaheen Nasir's excellent presentation on gender norms in the education in Pakistan, whereby she presented results from her own experiment. Ms. Shaheen Nasir from the University of Oxford. Ladies and gentlemen, the way I'm going to do is that we will first complete the segment of the presentations, the technical presentations. We will then take a few questions from the audience with the permission of my panel speakers, because we've had some fantastic technical presentations, and then we will shift to the panel discussion mode. So without further ado, may I request Dr. Sonia Umar, Associate Professor from the University of Punjab, to make her presentation, which is on the subject of investigation of socio-cultural factors of maternal mortality in Pakistan with the help of 3 delay model. I request for strictly sticking to time so that we can have more time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good evening, everyone. Definitely, I will try to be precise, and I will try to convey. This is, in fact, for me, it is a message that I would like to convey to everyone, because what I'm going to tell you, it's what I have documented, and I assure you, a very less is documented on that pivotal issue. Maternal mortality is, in fact, a loss. It is a loss to the society. When you lose a mother, you lose too much. There's a great loss to the family. And
Can we please have the correct presentation on the screen?
yeah.
Do we have a presentation for this session?
We do have.
Can organizers please support with making sure that we have the correct presentation by Dr. Sonia Omar? Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. So what I was telling you, it is maternal mortality is a loss to the society, and it talks much on the inequalities. It talks much on the discriminations in the society. It talks much on the status of the women in the society. So let me introduce you the investigating social and cultural factors of the maternal mortality with the help of the 3-delay model that was introduced by the 2 American professors in 1984. And it is very much a part of the WHO programs on the maternal health even today. It is very significant. So I worked on it. How do I? All right. So I'll quickly give you an introduction on the maternal mortality, what is happening around the world and what is happening in Pakistan. The researches on the maternal mortality, they usually lie in the domain of the healthcare, and you know very little about the social and cultural factors. These are the real factors that are very much impacting the lives of the women who are living in the underdeveloped, underdeveloping regions. Globally, the figures are quite, disturbing. 1 pregnant woman is dying because of maternal, maternal issues in every 2 minutes, and 99% of the maternal death cases around the world, they are reported in the underdeveloped regions or the developing regions. Just to give you the definition, many of you, maybe you are not familiar with the term. Maternal mortality is in fact the death of a pregnant woman, either during pregnancy or within 42 days of the termination of the pregnancy, irrespective of the duration and the site of the pregnancy, from any cause relating to or aggravated by the pregnancy or its management, but not from any accidental or incidental causes. Just to give you an insight, प्रेगनेंसी के फर्स्ट डे से लेकर हम सब यहाँ पे जानते हैं, एक टर्म हम अपने घरों में यूज करते हैं, छिला, जो birth के बाद के 40 days. These are very, very crucial, and most of the deaths are happening in those 40 days. And actually, we don't know about this. I even didn't know about this unless or until I went to the areas and I started working. Pakistan also facing major challenges when it's come to the maternal deaths and health care. Currently, the country, it ranks, unfortunately, as Dr. Nilofer, whatever she was talking, I was taking it so seriously, because we are 53 out of the 184 countries in terms of the maternal mortalities. We are 3rd in South Asia. So we should not be surprised about the figure. This is happening. All right. Globally, the maternal mortality, now the delay, the 3-delay model, which I have used, it has used many models, many theories to understand the phenomena of maternal mortality. As in the beginning of my presentation, I have shared with you, it is not just the medical causes that are leading women to death, but the number of social and cultural factors. To understand the social and cultural factors, in 1984, 2 American professors in the Baltimore University, they investigated maternal mortality in the context of those social, culture, and factors, and they used a model. They were Main and Thedis, and that model was called a 3-delay model. You can look at it. The first 3-delay, the first significant factor, it talks about the delay in seeking care. जब हम care को seek कर रहे हैं, there's a problem, and then there's a delay in it. तो I'll tell you आगे कि वो कितना 70% deaths इस delay की वजह से हो रही हैं. Then we have second delay, which is identifying and reaching the medical facility. That's very important. We all who are sitting in Islamabad, we know very well, we are the 10-20% of the population of Pakistan. 60% almost, they're living in the rural areas, and they are the people who are facing all these things. And the third delay, all right, आप किसी तरह से पहुंच गए medical facility में. Now what is happening there? So these are the 3 delays, and I will quickly go through the significant factors that I have investigated in each delay. I'll quickly go through the objectives. I'll see social and cultural practices. And what I have done in this research, I have taken the perspective of the families, the health service providers, doctors and the lady health workers, and they will let us know. They have in fact told us what is happening. This is my study area. You can see the highlighted DG Khan. I have taken Punjab and I have taken DG Khan. The table I have taken from the multiple indicator cluster survey. And these are the very serious, unfortunately, very disappointing state of affair in DG Khan that talks about the women their least antenatal care. Antenatal care is the 3 medical checkups that are mandatory for any pregnant woman. This is not happening. Only 24% in DG Khan, they are taking it. That was my study area. 40.5%, only 40.5% they are attending. They're having a skilled birth attendant. 55.3% they are having births with the help of the DAI. We all understand DAI, the traditional, the TBS, the traditional birth attendants. And then we have the figures, less literacy rate. So that was the reason. The reason of choosing DG Khan was that table particularly, and it was issued by multiple indicator cluster survey by Statistical Bureau of Pakistan in 2018. Methodology simply, it was a qualitative research. और मैं इसको आगे कर देती हूँ. I've told you I have used key informative interviews and focus group discussion, and very, very important, verbal autopsies. Verbal autopsies is a method when you talk to the family जहाँ पे death हुई हुई है. So you identify a person who has been, who remained close to the mother, or then you talk to the family, or you come to know कि हुआ क्या, you know, what happened, how did the mother die. Or thematic analysis के through I have it's not working further. Yeah. So with the help of thematic analysis, I just quickly go through it, the scientific method which we use to draw the findings. The first delay is seeking care. One important thing I will quickly tell you, the researchers are supporting my research. 73% of the maternal deaths are because of this first delay of maternal mortality, and that is seeking care. जब हम seek कर रहे होते हैं care, उसमें हमें जो issues आते हैं, क्या issues आते हैं? Significantly, जो important है, the poor socio-economic status. Of course, my study area, DG Khan, there are lots of researches over there. Reports of the mix 2017-18 also says that DG Khan is a poverty-ridden area, or 56.9 people, they fall in the poorest wealth index. So because of having less resources, because of the poverty, because of no resources, or the scarcity of the resources, the pregnant women, उन पे जो है वो उस तरह से care नहीं होती. One of the respondent verbatims, अगर मैं quickly आपको थोड़े बताऊं तो maybe you realize the intensity of these phenomena which is called maternal mortality. एक disease की mother ने मुझे कहा, I cannot make sure good medical care because we are unable to eat 3 meals a day. When little children are crying of hunger, I cannot feed pregnant mother first. So pregnant woman cannot be a priority of a family of 15 people. There are 8 children and a father and mother and a husband and wives, you know, there's a family system. मैं आपको quickly बताऊं, madam, with your permission. वेड़ा कहते हैं पंजाबी. I'm very good. I'm from Punjab, Lahore, so I'm good in Punjabi. So I was sitting in a वेड़ा and there was like 10 दरवाजे थे. मुझे उस एक दिन के अंदर 4 maternal deaths report हुई 1.5 साल के अंदर. 16 साल की लड़की, 18 साल की लड़की. And I went to the THQs. Literally, I'm talking and I'm having goosebumps. I'm sorry, I'll get emotional because I've worked in the area. तो मैंने उनसे पूछा तो उन्होंने, और ये that report नहीं होती. I wish Madam Nilofer would have been here. I would tell her कि please, तहसील headquarters hospitals और DHQ district headquarter hospitals के अंदर kindly systems अच्छे बनाइए. आप जो papers में report कर रहे maternal death, उससे कहीं ज़्यादा report हो रही है. उस वेड़े में, वेड़ा इस पंजाबी में जो होता है खुली सी जगह, और तो वहाँ पे जो death report है उसका कोई, मुझे सिर्फ lady health workers लेके गई हैं. So my methodology was to approach those houses with the help of lady health workers. I had a permission from the government of Punjab health department, but it didn't work. So I had to enter the community through the gatekeepers. So this is what happened with me. इसी तरह से एक डॉक्टर ने मुझे कहा कि क्या गुर्बत की वहाँ पे हालत है. इन usually in a state of emergency, the mothers are brought to us, and before I start any medical treatment, it is so obvious while I looking at the condition of the mother, she is malnourished throughout the pregnancy period. She hardly had anything to eat, and it will be foolish asking and questioning why you seek medical care and why are you here. So these are unfortunately the realities. Illiteracy and lack of employment opportunities. ऊपर आप देख लीजिए फिगर्स ऑलरेडी सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं कि हो क्या रहा है पाकिस्तान में. वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट द इलिटरेसी एंड लैक ऑफ, और इलिटरेसी इज वन ऑफ द वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट इशू. अगर औरत खुद भी बच्ची पढ़ी लिखी नहीं है जो प्रेग्नेंट होती है, मदर इन लॉ का, आई वॉज नॉट मे बी आई हैड अ गुड मदर इन लॉ, तो मैं एग्री नहीं कर रही थी कि मदर इन लॉ का क्या रोल है रूरल एरियाज में. तो फिर वो बाद में कई रिसर्च से पता चला. So one of the middle-aged lady health worker, illiteracy or lack of employment opportunity, पर उसने कहा, let's not expect men to take care of their pregnant wife. Job opportunities are very scarce, they are very limited, and ignorance further add fuel to the issues. The feudal system has kept people poor, out of education. Seasonal employment keep them in a vicious cycle of poverty, and they're unable to come out of it. Similarly, वहाँ डीजी खान के अंदर, because of lack of opportunities, there's a very huge number of people who are living abroad. When people live abroad, so pregnant women, you know, when they come once in a year or twice in a year, and every time the women become pregnant, so the salaries goes through the hand of the mother-in-law, the elder person, because women less economic participation, no control over the resources, no control even over her body. So that makes women life more difficult. Status of the woman, एक lady health worker ने मुझे कहा, I would say animal and women are, I'm sorry, but these are the harsh word. Sometimes that I sound pessimistic, but this is happening. They're treated in the same manner. Women are only these sex machines. They are being treated badly to produce children. Health is secondary thing here. I have seen women starving in pregnancies and nobody bothered to feed them. Women have no control over assets. Even they cannot decide over the family planning issues. And lady health workers से मुझे बताया कि कई areas में उनको जब वो family planning methods के लिए आती हैं, and they talk to the communities, उनको पथराव भी होता है. तो मैंने अपनी policy implication में कहा है कि where the government is standing in those areas, just like the polio workers, they are attacked. People maybe didn't know that lady health workers जो family planning issues पे काम करते हैं, उन पे भी attack होते हैं, but they are not reported. एक mother-in-law ने मुझे कहा, my daughter is no more. Sorry, my daughter-in-law होना चाहिए यहाँ पे, मेरी बहू is no more. It was Allah's will. People blame me of delaying her medical treatment, but I had to wait for son to come, Parda, and she had complications. Look, now I have to look after her 7 children. Girls honestly better receive education from madrasas. Let me get them married as soon as possible. Let us concentrate on the boys. Early marriages, South Asia में, पाकिस्तान में बहुत ज़्यादा जो है वो हाई हो रही हैं. निप की रिपोर्ट है, वी ऑल नो 15 to 19 years में हो रही हैं, which is very high. एक mother in law ने कहा, I was married at the age of 15. So what if my daughter-in-law was married at the same age? Our religion allows that. My own daughter was married at the early age. Look, the more the girl is young, the more the bright chances of having more children, and they need more children. We can't keep an eye all the time, so it is better to marry them off. एक गायनोकोलॉजिस्ट ने क्विकली कह के मैं आगे चलती हूँ. इट इज सैड टू सी यंग, क्योंकि मैटरनल मोर्टेलिटी का अर्ली मैरिजेस के साथ बहुत गहरा ताल्लुक है, बिकॉज यंग गर्ल्स they cannot tolerate, their body cannot tolerate pregnancies every year, and unfortunately there are stillbirths. Pakistan stands number 1 in the world with the high infant mortality. I think it's still 2-3 साल पहले तक तो हम आए थे, अब I don't know 2 पे या 3 पे हैं, but infant mortality इस वजह से. So the lady gynecologist said it's sad to see young girls brought by the family in such bad conditions. These young girls are vulnerable to complicated pregnancies because of getting pregnant so early. Thus, this increase the obstructed labor, complications जो labor में होती. So early marriages, these are the prime causes.
Sonia, I hate to interrupt,
yeah.
but if I could request you to please wrap up in the
Yeah. ये madam, what? Large family size, no focus on the population planning, या contraceptive का इस्तेमाल, या talking on this is a great taboo. जैसा कि इसमें लिखा हुआ है, it is haram to, you know, in a religion to talk on it. और average family size mix की report में भी है 7 to 8 तो minimum है. There is a difficulty, you know. All right, I will quickly इस पे बात करके second and third delay, and quickly I will wrap up the conclusion. Religious myths, पीर साहब का किरदार. One of my significant finding, मैं quickly इसको cover up कर रही हूँ, हेपेटाइटिस बहुत ज़्यादा वहाँ पे जो है प्रेग्नेंट औरतों को भी है, और sometime अगर वो स्कैन करा भी लें, हेपेटाइटिस इज डायग्नोज, तो पीर साहब इज द वन हु लुक आफ्टर. in quite greater majority. And then the traditional birth attendant, the role of the dai. Peer Saab give us a spiritual water and वो फूक देते हैं, and you really don't need to go to the doctor. This is happening. Birthplace preference उनके अभी भी घर है. मुझे एक खातून ने कहा कि मैं एक बोरी दे देती हूँ गंदम की दाई को, and she'll come and she'll take care of my daughter-in-law. कोई बात नहीं, उसका वैसे भी 8वां बच्चा, and she is used to of it. Quickly, second delay के अंदर जो चीजें हैं वो distance है. BHU is the first हमारा interaction होता है. Then we have the THQs, and then we have the DHQ in the tertiary hospital. BHU में facility नहीं होती, और गांव के लोग तब जाते हैं जब complication हो रही है, bleeding हो रही है, and there are things, and by the time जब वो hospital पहुंचते हैं तो वहां पे death जो है वो हो जाती है. Distance. Then we have means of the transportation. We all know because of the lack of resources, ambulances का वहाँ पे, और ambulance का मुझे उन्होंने बताया कि अगर आ रही है then खराब हो रही है, and then the road conditions. So that was a second delay. These are the significant मेरी findings थी, means of transportation और ये सारी चीजें. Poor infrastructure of road, I've talked on it. And very important कि वो they have to wait for the men or the elder person to come. Even कभी complication हो भी जाए तो they wait for it. थर्ड डिले के अंदर अब दो तरह के परसेप्शन है. फैमिली का अपना परसेप्शन है, वो कहते हैं जी हम हॉस्पिटल गए, हमें तो पूछा नहीं. डॉक्टर कहते हैं कि दे डोंट कोऑपरेट विद अस, एंड वी ऑल, आई वाज स्टैंडिंग इन तौंसा शरीफ, आई रिमेंबर, विदाउट एनी पॉलिटिकल एफिलिएशन, and that day Usman Buzdar Sahab was appointed as a CM Punjab, and in Taunsa there was no blood bank in his own areas of Usman Buzdar Sahab. I'm sorry, this is not maybe, but I've seen it. So उनके अपने इलाके में blood bank नहीं था, और जो mothers थी maternal gynecology ward के अंदर वो loss of blood से उनकी death हो जाती है. मैं conclusion पे आ रही हूँ. थर्ड डिले के अंदर इस तरह से फैसिलिटीज इन द हॉस्पिटल, एटीट्यूड ऑफ द फैमिली. डेथ रजिस्ट्रेशन पे मैं आपसे बात कर चुकी हूँ. दे डोंट रजिस्टर द डेथ्स, दे डोंट रजिस्टर इट. गवर्नमेंट का डेटा बहुत ज्यादा खराब हो जाएगा अगर रजिस्टर करेंगे. और 2 या 3 डेथ्स मिलती हैं मुझे 2 साल के अंदर, तो मैंने उनके बोला लाहौर के लेडी विलिंगटन हॉस्पिटल में ज्यादा रजिस्टर नहीं है, आप यहाँ पे रजिस्टर नहीं कर रहे हैं. कंक्लूजन यही है कि जी 3 डिले मॉडल, इट हैज बीन ऑफ ग्रेट मीनिंग टू अंडरस्टैंड मैटरनल डेथ. It is the study has concluded maternal health जो है, it is a complex phenomena which is associated to the behavioral patterns, social and cultural practices, and कहीं ना कहीं हमें इसको देखना है. Key findings reveal करती हैं women are still a subject, they're subjected to the rift between available healthcare practices, culture, beliefs and economic necessities. Policy implications के अंदर मैं quickly अगर आप ये सारा देख लीजिए, मैं आपको एक छोटी सी चीज बता देती हूँ. एक दफा एक एनजीओ ने वहां पे एक प्रोग्राम, प्रोबेबली इट वाज यूनिसेफ और यूएनडीपी, आई डोंट रिमेंबर, 3 साल के लिए उन्होंने इधर तौंसा के एक अंदर एरिया के अंदर उन्होंने कहा कि दीज आर द इंसेंटिव वी विल गिव यू. हम जो औरत वहां पे रजिस्टर्ड होगी फॉर द एंटीनेटल केयर, प्रेग्नेंट औरत, तो उस फैमिली को हम इतने thousands देंगे, या you know. So there are many programs the non-government organization, government can do for the empowerment of the women, especially for the sensitization of the husbands and the mother-in-law, the caregivers. और उसके साथ जाहिर है हमें हॉस्पिटल्स को अगर हमें सही करना है, इसमें मेरी एक बड़ी सिग्निफिकेंट फाइंडिंग है कि BHU को थोड़ा बेहतर कर दें. वो सबसे कम डिस्टेंस होता है कम्युनिटी का उनके साथ. So there are a lot of things, protection to the daily health workers, and these were the references. I'm sorry. Thank you so much.
Dr. Sonia Umar, thank you so much for a very, I have to say, personally, it was a very painful presentation, but very eye-opening, very moving. And I think we probably deserve a whole day to listen to your presentation in depth, really, you know, at the heart of the matter. I realize that we are stretched for time and we have a few more speakers to go to. So I would request our audience for a bit of patience. Let me do a round of first statements by our panel speakers, and then we can open up the house for questions. I'll start with Ms. Raja Bukhari, who's the program manager of the Pakistan Business Council, Karachi. Raja, I turn to you first. Why? Because we had a very good presentation by Dr. Maruzio Bosulo on South Asian indicators and trends on women's labor force participation. You're representing the private sector, you're a woman business leader yourself. Can you tell us specifically in Pakistani context, what are some of the structural issues you're confronted with on women leading businesses, women managing businesses, and what are some of the social norms which protract those barriers?
Thank you so much, Amara. I would first start off by saying that one of the benefits of working, the main benefit of working at the Pakistan Business Council is that we get to interact with some of the largest companies in the country. And we learn from that a few things. One of them is basically there is no reporting and transparency structure in place that helps us understand what are the consistent barriers that women are facing when they enter the workforce. So we conduct our own research, we do primary research. We have also created the Gender Diversity Awards. They happened, the first cycle happened earlier in June, the second cycle will start next year. And what we asked companies to do was to tell us what practices and policies do you have in place that is enabling women in the workplace. We see quite a number of things. First of all, there's a lot of confusion as to what the law really says. Second of all, providing childcare services for working mothers in particular, but in general, also having flexible work arrangements for women, whether they're mothers or not, whether they're married or not. Transport is a very big problem, and creating a work culture which is safe and dignified is another major factor that women are facing when they enter the workforce. But what we try to emphasize to companies is whatever progress you have made so far, report on that. Because what we want companies to do is to start sharing best practices. For example, in the data that we had, there were plenty of companies that had women in senior management, and not just one woman, which can lead to tokenism, but maybe like 35% of their senior management is women. That is rare, but it is very welcoming to see. So what we ask companies to do is to share what exactly is working out for you that enables this, and then other companies can learn from that. Pakistan is not just like missing regularized data, but it's also missing local contextual information. You can look at global practices, you can bring that into the country, you can say that you have buyer pressure if you're an exporter especially, so you have to meet certain standards. But there's something much more heartening to see things that are actually happening within Pakistan. And that helps build companies' confidence that if our peer can do it, then we can do it as well. Currently, the status of women-led businesses, of course, as everybody knows, is very low. Even among the PBC membership, we don't have many businesses that are led by women. I mean, I think the number is less than 10, perhaps 5. And what we really see is that now there is a focus on developing female leaders throughout the corporate ladder. So when a woman enters the workforce, she is actually given the tools and the training to be able to move up the corporate ladder, so move from from being a part of the staff to being a middle manager, then a senior manager, and eventually entering the board. That gives a lot of confidence to us that we know that eventually this will also encourage women to be leaders in the company. We'll see more female CEOs, we'll see more equal representation on boards and across senior management, which should hopefully encourage a much more equal and gender balanced work environment.
Thank you very much, Raja, for that fantastic overview in such a short span of time. A very good perspective from the private sector, which, by the way, offers a lot of silver lining in a country where the indicators, frankly speaking, are so poor, as we saw in earlier in Sonia's presentation. I want to quickly move to Fajir Rabia, who again is representing the entrepreneurial sector, and we now have a lot of data and research coming out on how COVID impacted and was a game changer for businesses, for homes, for jobs, specific impact on women. Fajr, what are your thoughts on what have been some of the lessons learned from COVID, and how have they affected women's livelihoods, women's lives in the new context. Over to Fajr.
Thank you very much. So my area of work is primarily girls' education, not entrepreneurship, but of course that's something that's very close to my heart. But I don't want to go over too much into statistics. I think Nilofer has covered statistics, other presenters have covered statistics, and they're very horrible and very heartbreaking, and anything that we look at which is related to women is poor. So I think what it comes down to is the mindset and the cultural norms that we've been talking about. And when I see the situation in Pakistan, I see being a woman is like a crime, literally, because and we're talking about, you know, what happened during COVID. For example, in Pakistan, we've had at least 25% increase in reported cases of domestic violence, and that's on record. That's the government data. So anything and everything that we look at, and this was pre-COVID as well. It's never been like where status of women have been any better. Unfortunately, if a woman is working, for example, and she's excelling in her career, her character is questioned. If she's raped, and we have seen these cases, she's questioned that why were you out of the house? Why do you smile? Why you dress? And I say, why do you breathe in the first place? So, you know, and unfortunately, these are very heartbreaking facts. And we see very small percentage of families who truly respect women in the true sense and really facilitate their girls, their mothers, their wives, their sisters. We know that, you know, when we're talking about education, and we know education is the foundation of our society, and we know that if girls are not getting education, we're not giving them the right skill sets to fight the challenges of the life they're faced with. And but what happens that access to education is an emergency in Pakistan, pre-COVID as well, post-floods as well. It's always been an emergency. But when we're looking at girls, we see that more girls drop out. As they grow older, only 13% of the girls in Pakistan make it to grade 9. We know that girls even getting into universities, that very lucky handful of girls who make it to universities, are then not allowed to work, you know, or to get into an employment or into entrepreneurship, because those numbers are also very low. But that's where I see that the patriarchal mindset has to change. You see, because unless we change that mindset, and that obviously there are solutions there are interventions that can be done from policy level to engaging media, to engaging communities on ground, and engaging teachers, as one of the presenters has said, who can play one of the most important role in changing that mindset. So I think, you know, that these are the sort of important things that I would like to highlight, that when we look at stats and figures in any area, may that be healthcare, may that be education, may that be economic participation, all we see is that women are far, far behind. Because and this mindset that not only is in we say if it's just the men, but it's also the women, right? So it's the women who brainwash their daughters right from beginning to say, you're a girl, you can't do this, you can't dress like this, you can't talk loudly. So you know, these are the things that we really need to address if we want to change the society. If we keep coming up with different interventions, that's where we go wrong. If we want to, let's just say, okay, we'll have a great program going on education, but that is not holistic enough to address the challenges the girls are facing. Their social and mental well-being is not a priority. बल्कि वो तो consider ही नहीं होती. It's not something that we talk about. You know, वो तो है ही नहीं. उसका तो मतलब औरत को तो ज़रूरत ही नहीं है, because औरत को, you know, she's just not, she doesn't need anything. So I think, you know, these are the things हम लोग को जिन पे focus करने की ज़रूरत है. As a society, it's not just the government's role, but जितने हमारे पढ़े लिखे, बेशक कि हम अपनी percentage के हिसाब से देखें तो बहुत कम हमारी society का हिस्सा है जो truly हम कहें कि educated है. But we need to change that. And of course, the government policies and how government can intervene in implementing, for example, कि teachers का role, जैसे मैं फिर मैं बात करूँ कि teachers का role इतना ज़रूरी है, जब पाकिस्तान जैसा मुल्क जिसकी economy इंतहाई weak है, we need to look at what resources we have on ground and how we can use those resources to be more gender responsive, and how our teachers who are already there on ground and they're being paid salaries, तो उनको किस तरह से वेल ट्रेन किया जा सके ताकि ये ऑन ग्राउंड इश्यूज को एड्रेस किया जा सके. आपने बात की कि अगर औरत प्रेग्नेंट है तो इट्स नॉट अ प्रायोरिटी टू फीड हर, first, and she'll be malnourished. It's same thing happened कि अगर बच्ची है, and this is what we saw in COVID times, for example.
Every year.
Yes, of course, yeah, absolutely. And what we saw during COVID, for example, was कि the girl had to be kept home ताकि वो घर के काम चीजें संभाल सके, छोटे बहन भाइयों को संभाल सके, because that load increased on our women and our girls during COVID times. The unpaid care work and domestic work increased. The domestic violence increased. Livelihoods were impacted. Businesses, small businesses led by women, जो पहले ही बहुत मुश्किलों से शुरू हुए होंगे, they were impacted because they don't have that support structure around them, starting from their own families. उनको किसी ने बाहर से आके नहीं support करना, उनको आपके जो घर में ही है, आपके husband है, आपकी mother-in-law है. This is the family structure we have. If we have that, there is nothing wrong with that. But I think it's the mindset that we need to work on, that we need to change, so we can improve the status of women in Pakistan. And sometimes I also think that agar we're Muslims and we say we're a Muslim country, so we also need to go back and look at our Islamic history. I was reading, I'll just wrap up here. I was reading an example yesterday of a woman who was a companion of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And she was a warrior, and she was trained as a warrior, and she would go into battles and fight. So if a woman who was a companion of Prophet, and she could be out there fighting amongst the men, तो फिर आपका मजहब कहाँ ये कहता है कि औरत की कोई औकात नहीं है, जबकि आपका मजहब places so much importance and value and respect to women. So I think it all comes down to that mindset. जब वो change होगा तो आपकी policy level पे भी impact आएगा, और आपके ground level पे automatically you'll start to see that impact. Thank you very much.
Hajar, thank you so much. I apologize, I meant social entrepreneur. The work that you're doing for girls' education in Pakistan, it is very much entrepreneurial. You're not being paid for it. This is your own volition. That in itself is social entrepreneurship. That's your own initiative. Thank you also for sharing with us that beautiful last example from the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, life, whose woman, Sahaba, incidentally, I'm named after her, Amara, that was her name, who fought alongside the Holy Prophet in the battles. I want to quickly turn to Dr. Mariam Mohsin, Assistant Professor Pai. We've had a fantastic set of presentations, Mariam, covering labor force participation at the regional level. They're an excellent presentation on experimentation in the education sector by Shireen. Really moving presentation by Sonia on really the micro issues in the most impoverished, one of the most impoverished region of Pakistan, maternal mortality, and really on the front line, my sisters like Fajr, who are on the front lines of tackling the social and the political and the economic while trying to promote education. We've had COVID, and that was followed by floods. And now specifically, not only in Pakistan, but all over the world is experiencing a time of economic slowdown, and in certain countries, economic emergencies because of increased debt burdens. We've seen things in Sri Lanka, we've seen in Lebanon. In Pakistan, we're experiencing a very, very grave time of economic fragility. How is that all adding up for women's lives in Pakistan with these back-to-back crises?
Thank you so much for inviting me here to speak on this topic, which is very close to my heart and my research interests, and for shaping up that question, because that helps me, really narrow down all of the stuff that I've been writing since the start of the day. All right. Dr. Basulu, when he began talking about the GDP to growth rate, relationship, the GDP growth to women's economic empowerment relationship, spoke of Bozarab's thesis, which is a U-shaped curve, right? The relationship between the GDP and women's economic participation. It's a U-shaped curve when Bozarab talks about it. Otherwise, normal neoclassical theory says that it's an increasing, straight line. It's a linear relationship. Growth hogi, GDP बढ़ेगा, औरतों को भी jobs मिलेंगी, उनकी भी jobs increasing. But there's also a third perspective, which is the critical feminist perspective, which says that the growth rate of country does not necessarily have to do much with women's economic empowerment if the social norms do not allow for it. If the organizations are designed such that the women can still not find a way in those organizations because they're so inherently masculine. So I'm going to take that perspective. I just wanted to make that clear before I start sounding bonkers to the economists in the room, because given that I'm from PIDE. All right. Now, Pakistan is a country where we have classic patriarchy. We have extended, family structures. Gender roles are very defined. Women face the brunt of an unequal amount of care work and childcare, right? There's male control over women's decisions to choose careers, to choose employment, and then over their earnings as well. All of that, right? Then there's segregation, there's issues of mobility, you name it. Now what? We've heard a lot about changing social norms, but that comes from a very problematic space in itself, because that comes from a very colonized, understanding of our social norms. Do we westernize? Does that change do we change our family structure to something else? Does that solve our problems? No. The problem is that the setup of our organizations here in Pakistan are inherently masculine, and they're not going to change whether or not our social norms change. The organization as a level of analysis receives very little attention when we come to talk of women's economic participation. We talk of women as individuals. कि वो क्यों choose नहीं करती जाना, उसका decision कौन influence करता है? बिल्कुल, individual, micro level of analysis. Social level, families allow क्यों नहीं करती? Society में हम देखते हैं, we look at it as from a very macro perspective. But we miss that one meso level of analysis, which is the organization, right? And the organization reinforces problematic social norms. The organization strengthens problematic social norms. For example, if the society, there's a social norm that women should not go out to work because they will not be safe, for example, they'll face sexual harassment. And if the organizations are not sensitive about sexual harassment and there's sexual harassment at the workplace, this reinforces that social norm, right? If, for instance, there's a social norm that women can go work if the children will not be, for example, neglected. If it does not mean they'll become bad mothers if they go out to work, right? And if organizations here in Pakistan are so not ready for the presence of women inside them, that there is no available childcare, no available daycare for women inside these organizations. Now they're reproducing those social norms, and this is happening in Pakistan even at the highest level of organizations. How many of organizations that you're working for have daycares? Even UN Women in Pakistan, at least the Peshawar office I'm aware, has no daycare. So that is the ground reality. When we talk about changing social norms, we should not talk about changing people's beliefs, their faith, their family structures. What we need to talk about is the policy areas where we actually have influence. Why is the neoliberal structure of the organization so forgiven so easily? Why the organization studies literature, how does it define the ideal worker? Someone who's individualistic, who's competitive, who's smart, who's enterprising, who's available, who can, who's there at the nick of the hour, who can just, sit on the bike and reach the office if they require. This by definition defines a man. So our understandings, see, the relationship between womanhood or women's careers and social norms is that the idea of womanhood, the idea of motherhood, the idea of women
University of Oxford, fantastic use of media for influencing minds in the primary school structures. Sonia Umar, kudos to you for going out there and digging out information about our country, which is so critical. And then, more power to Raja and to Fajr and to Mariam for pushing the boundaries and putting up new ideas on the table. And most importantly, I thank SDPI and the World Bank for supporting this important conversation. And I want to thank our audience, our listeners who have very patiently listened to these voices and also supported and participated in the conversation. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
And
very
you
much.
have been a great moderator. Thank you.
And thank you. A round of applause for Ms. Samara Durrani for very well-structured moderation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ji. Audience might go outside for the tea, and I'll request the panel to stay behind for a group photo. Thank you.